Welcome to the Life Expansion After 50 series on central nervous system recalibration, the missing link for performance after 50. What if your body isn't broken? It's just understimulated. What if your willpower hasn't faded? It's just out of sync with your nervous system. And what if what you've been chasing in supplements, diets, and even workouts isn't wrong? It's simply misdirected. Welcome to the beginning of something different. This is the first talk in a new series called Central Nervous System Recalibration. It's a process to reset, recharge, and rewire your central nervous system so that you can unlock your physical, mental, performance potential. When you're ready to activate it, you still have the same potential that you've had in the past. It's just that it's sort of dormant. And yes, this matters whether you're an athlete, a leader, a parent, or just someone who wants to stay strong and focused in the second half of their adult life. Let me set the stage. For most of our lives, we've been taught to think of performance through one of three lenses: muscle, mindset, or motivation. And when things slow down or we hit a plateau, we're told to work harder, maybe eat cleaner, or maybe take some supplements. But there's a fourth lens that most people never learn to look through. And it's not a new muscle group or a secret pill. It's the operating system that connects your thoughts, movements, reactions, emotions, and energy. It's your central nervous system. And how calibrated it is determines whether the rest of your performance fires or just fizzles. Central nervous system calibration is reconnecting the dots between three things: the signals your brain sends, the neural pathways those signals travel through, and the physical actions or emotional responses that they produce. Now, these three links all fit under the heading of synaptogenesis. Think of it as activating existing neural pathways that are inactive due to non-use. Said another way, the synapses moves from inactive neural pathways to active neural pathways because the body wants to be efficient and is not going to produce more neurotransmitter than it perceives that it needs. When any link in that chain weakens, your body compensates by slowing down, maybe avoiding risk, or even tuning out your drive. You might feel like you've lost the ability to engage at the level that you desire, when what you've really lost is signal strength. The good news, you can rebuild that signal faster than you think. In studying high performance, especially after 50, the takeaway is this: it's not about building muscles, at least not at first. The important element is signal strength. A weak signal cannot fire the muscle to the point of failure. A strong signal requires speed and precision as well as strength. Accomplishing this requires neurotransmitters like acetylcholine and glutamate to do the heavy lifting, dopamine to set up the reward structure, and serotonin to uplift your mood so you're able to go back at it again and you can recover from any setbacks. All of these can be provided and boosted by a simple exercise protocol. While more willpower is not the target, you'll find willpower does improve because willpower correlates with heart rate variability. Not only does the protocol support neurotransmitter production, glutamate, dopamine, serotonin, and acetylcholine, it also improves heart rate variability, which has a direct correlation with willpower. And it improves a host of other functions. Think of heart rate variability as your dashboard, whereas the central nervous system calibration is the system under the hood. Together, they help you steer your life with energy and clarity and predictability. In this series, I'm going to walk through 7 specific elements that accelerate synaptogenesis, the rewiring of your neural pathways. Now, you've heard of this as neuroplasticity. What I'm doing is breaking it down and putting into terms that make sense, that we can actually apply it, and more importantly, see results within 7 days. Because once you see the results, it's hard to unsee them, and you'll start to recognize the patterns that lead to recalibration of your central nervous system. And that includes the production of key neurotransmitters that make movement easier, focus sharper, and energy more available. They're novelty, intention, precision, balance, struggle, progression, and explosiveness. And I'll go through each of these in today's session, and then we'll unpack those and more in future sessions. Now, each one of these activates the nervous system in a different way. Each one builds toward a a body and brain that can still adapt, perform, and recover, even after 50. Every exercise won't include all 7. Some may only include 1 or 2. But the closer we can get to all 7 in each of the exercises, and more importantly, understand why they work, then you'll be able to create your own exercises, you'll create your own protocols, and you'll make changes in your lifestyle because you have a new reward system set up. The dopamine sees that there are benefits from recalibrating the central nervous system. And just like in your 20s and 30s, when more muscle drove you to the gym, now you see that more capability drives you to these exercises. Now, these aren't tips, they're switches. And the reason I created this model is simple. Overall, society is spending billions of dollars chasing desired results from supplements, hacks, and quick fixes without addressing the source. If your body isn't being asked to adapt, then it won't. In fact, worse than that, it's recalibrating for ever easier times ahead, which is a problem because it's assuming the future will be less demanding than the present. So the plan is to find ways to preserve energy by not creating neurotransmitter in the future. You get the picture. If your neurotransmitters aren't activated through real-world input, then no stack of capsules can replace the signal they were meant to carry. The inverse is true as well. More demands means more neurotransmitter production. But it gets better. The reason I call it calibration is because the central nervous system predicts what will be required in the future. The simple act of progressing some element of load, even in very small increments, and I recommend small increments because it eliminates the need for recovery between exercise. Even very small increments have the effect of alerting the system that greater demands are ahead. This signaling causes the body to produce more neurotransmitters. So we start here with the nervous system, with your brain's ability to send, receive, and react with your body's ability to get faster, stronger, sharper. Not in spite of your age, but because you train it based on what it needs. Throughout the series, I'll repeat, test it for yourself, and provide different examples for people of all fitness levels so you can try it for yourself and experience results in a week. No placebo effect, no requirement to believe, and no major lifestyle changes other than engaging in some simple exercises for a few minutes per day. That's to test it. Sound too good to be true? It isn't. The reason is the strategy that has been hiding in plain sight is overlooked or not even on the radar. To set this up, we want to look at a few things. One, everything I say today, and I encourage you to do this, to Google it yourself, and when possible, test out the exercises to see the results that you get. But when you Google it, think in terms of Googling just one element. There's so much information out on the internet, and you've probably discovered it. We all go down these rabbit holes and find out there's tons of information available on a topic that you barely knew existed. The challenge is that we're talking about things that are in the neuroscience realm, the physical therapy realm, the sports training realm, fitness realm, and more. And while there is some crosstalk, the way science works is the scientists tend to do their research within their silo. So you have these multiple silos. And for example, physical therapy is more about from below the line, getting you back up to status quo, whereas what we're talking about is moving above the line, which has similarities, but the vernacular is not really supported because we're not talking about a cure or getting back. We're talking about going higher. So when you do your searches, do it in that way. But for example, you can look up terms like synaptogenesis. What does glutamate do? What does acetylcholine do? What are the elements of the central nervous system and what does it have to do with neurotransmitter? You can look up terms like that to see the responses that you get. The second thing I want to say is this. For years, I've said that in the 30s, we tend to slow down a little bit. In the 40s, we need, talking about age ranges, in the 40s, we need more recovery time. In the 50s, we start to lose a little bit of flexibility. In the 60s, we lose strength, and in the 70s, we start to lose mobility. And while most people agree with me on that, what isn't so obvious is that we lose these things not because of aging. We lose them because we're not putting the demand on our system. It could be for a variety of things, but just the simple thing from, we go from teenagers and 20s to where we're more active doing all sorts of things. We're burning the candle at both ends. And by being active, we're generating more neurotransmitter. In our 30s, we start to slow down, relax a little bit, focus on work, whatever it is, raising the family. And that lower demand requires less neurotransmitter. That starts a cycle, a process that causes us to start looking for relaxation, for opportunities to conserve energy. That creates another cycle of literally declining of our neurotransmitters. And the main neurotransmitters that serve us, that are generated by putting a demand on the body, dopamine, that's the reward system. That's your reward setup. So even desiring to go to the gym is easier in our 20s and 30s because we're getting feedback and we're getting stronger. So we go back again. Once that feedback starts to slow down and flatten, there's less interest in going to the gym. Well, the more neurotransmitter you have, the more dopamine you have available, and we can reignite that reward cycle. Serotonin, that's the feel good. And people think of serotonin maybe as a brain hormone. It's produced in the gut. And so the more serotonin we have, the more feel good. People chase all sorts of things for quote unquote happiness. Well, if you have more serotonin, it's going to be easier to modulate your mood. Then there's acetylcholine. Acetylcholine conveys or transmits the message from the neural pathway to the muscle to activate it. So we have a neural pathway. In fact, let me just go to the pad and illustrate it. So let's say we have the central nervous system right here. And this central nervous system is paying attention to all kinds of things. You have the autonomic nervous system in there and the peripheral nervous system, but let's just keep it at a high level. Central nervous system, I call this like the command center. It's what keeps everything running and running smoothly, keeps us performing. And it's also predictive. It's looking ahead to see what kind of demands are possible, which is why this system that which I'll share today is so important. And let's say now that you want to lift a weight. So this desire to lift a weight goes through a neurotransmitter called glutamate. Glutamate then transfers that to a neural pathway. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not into fitness. I'm not a physical therapist. I have nothing to do with that kind of work. I'm a business coach, and my focus is on helping business owners perform at high levels. And in order to do that, they themselves have to perform at a high level because business is throwing things at you. So what we do is we work on 7 fitness areas: mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, relationship, professional, and financial. So physical is one of those, and that's where this one comes into play. But it's a big part of it because the physicality, that's our vessel that moves us around. Now, I'm going to say there's 2 kinds of neural pathways. I'm going to draw another one down here, and I'll come back to it. So there's 2, and again, it's not a neuroscience term. I'm just wanting to illustrate it in lay terms. So the glutamate is important because it's the trigger, it's the initiator of the signal along the neural pathway. Now we have 100 billion neurons, and each neuron interacts with, so these would be neurons, each neuron interacts with 1,000 and 10,000 other neurons. So this neural pathway obviously would be hundreds of neurons, and taking a couple of steps might involve thousands of neural pathways. So obviously this is not even a scaled drawing here. And then there's this other thing that happens in here, and that's the acetylcholine. And then we have the muscle. So we have the glutamate activates or sends the signal through the neural pathway, and then that hits this junction to the muscle, right? And that's where this is a neurotransmitter, and this is a neurotransmitter, and that's what activates the muscle. So if this signal is weak, this muscle is not going to get the activation it needs to lift the weight. If this signal is strong, but this signal is weak, or the transmission is weak, the muscle won't be able to lift. If this signal is strong, but this one is weak, the muscle won't be able to lift as much. So what happens is the more neurotransmitter we have, the more availability we have for the glutamate, the more availability we have for the acetylcholine, and the more availability we have for the dopamine and the serotonin, and there are other neurotransmitters that come into play as well. The reason I drew this one down here is because there's something that happens with deep practice. And if you look up anything around neuroplasticity, you can search neuroplasticity and deep practice, and what you'll find is deep practices struggling on the edge of ability. Daniel Coyle wrote a great book, The Talent Code, and he goes into deep to myelin, goes into deep practice, but he introduces myelin in a very effective, understandable way. And then there's also Grit by Angela Duckworth. She does a nice job of helping you understand the kinds of exercises that lead to deep practice, whereas Talent Code tends to be more focused on physical activity. I think Grit is a little bit broader, and you can see how it applies to thought as well. So what happens is, if you have deep practice, these neurons get wrapped with myelin, and there's more active synapses. Compared to a regular neural pathway without the deep practice, you have smaller synapses there, or less synapses involved. What can happen is this neural pathway stops being used. Let's say you used to play football and you've stopped. You have a lot of neurons in those potential neural pathways that have myelin, but there's no synapses there. There's no synapses because you haven't been using it. This is sort of a self-reinforcing problem, because by the time we're 50, if I look at muscle atrophy, and this is not a drawn to scale or representative graph, it's just figuratively explaining it. If I were to look at atrophy of a muscle, let's say that muscle atrophies like this. But what I will tell you is part of this is muscle atrophy, and part of it is neural pathway atrophy. So if your neural pathway drops like this, and your muscle is actually a little bit stronger like that, working on the muscle is not going to do nearly as much as working on the neurotransmitter. And what's nice about the neurotransmitter is that it can come up back to stasis in 1 to 3 days. What I used to think of as stabilizer muscle strengthening was actually the activation of the stabilizer muscle. This is like in the beginning of ski season, bicycling, any activity that you do, going back to lifting weights. That first day feels awkward. You feel like, I don't even want to bother. 2 or 3 days later, it's coming back. Skiing is a great example, because if you go for a week, by the 3rd day, you're almost back to where you were at the end of the last season, whereas the first day you felt like you barely skied before. So this is important, because the neurotransmitter can come back up very quickly, and the muscle atrophy does not go down as much as we thought. Now, back to this. This, left alone, these neurons stay there. What I was going to say is that they continue to stay wrapped with myelin. The synapses goes away, but the myelin stays. Now, myelin does break down with age, so it's two different things, right? Day to day, without use, the myelin, any breakdown would be negligible. But as you approach 50 and 60, the myelin does start to break down, but it's breaking down with age. But if you put demands on your body, you see the self-reinforcing process there. If you put demands on the body, the myelin won't break down as much. Now, if this happens, and now it's not so much the muscle atrophied, but the neural pathways atrophied, you're sitting like this. We can get the synapses back up. That's synaptogenesis. We can get the synaptogenesis to come back online. And now we have synapse again, which turns this into a neural pathway. Now, if you think it through, and you take a neural pathway that has less myelin, in other words, there wasn't a lot of deep practice, it wasn't a deep thought, but a person played competitive sports, maybe professional sports or college level sports, so they have a lot of myelin on their neurons. Reactivating them with the synapses can go a long way. And if at 50 you start looking back at some of the things you like to do as a teenager or in your 20s, physical I'm talking about, and start leaning back into them, you can actually experience this. So this is why this works. After 50, and 50, I'm using 50 as an arbitrary number. The podcast or the program is Life Expansion After 50. I would say you can notice it's starting in the 40s, but it's masked, because in the 40s, if your muscle atrophy was at this point, the neurotransmitter may have been decreasing much more slowly. After 50, the muscle atrophy may be like this,